while we were all listening to the talks, I jotted down a few points which I'm going to share that summarizes some of the points we made. Any comments? What I see is that we had really 4 different domains covered. One is this issue of modeling AI, and the question really is, what are the variables that should go into a model? Look at the complexities of the health system, and also what is the right way of thinking that underpins our models. And Michelle in particular talked about that. The question of understanding health, the inequality in society aspect mentioned by several speakers, super utilizes as an example. Question is it the wrong term to look at the wrong question? I think that's one of the things that struck out to me. And then the whole issue of communicating about what it means, my health. And then collectively, how does that translate into patient care, particularly patient-centered care? There's a political dimension of the value of health and healthcare. Can we muster the crisis as an opportunity to move forward? How do we communicate about it? And then communication as such, how to do it effectively, as much amongst each other as to the outside world. And as Kevin, I think, nicely put it, should we talk about the next normal rather than the new normal? And in a way of getting the transformation into a VUCA world done more effectively. So, any thoughts, any comments on, doesn't have to be in any particular order. Who wants to start?
Oh, I will.
Okay.
Okay, so I would like to speak to the modelling people if you're still here. I would like you to talk about the challenges you're having with selection of variables and and access to appropriate variables in routinely collected data, and how you go about the process. So I'd like to open up with a question. Okay, so what I'm going to say is that Peter Tassis might want to comment here, because I've been talking to Peter Tassis about doing modelling on data sets. But what to look at, patient trajectories. But what we find is that the variables in routinely collected data, first of all, are very crude. There's assumptions underpinning the model of which the data collection is made. There's challenges in the actual collection of the data, routinely collected data, and particularly social determinants not necessarily well incorporated into the model. So how could we go forward here? Peter, have you got any ideas if you're still here?
Yes, I can comment on a few things. Yeah, so the models, I think the issue there, and I think incorporate some of of Kevin's presentation into it, are as good as the predictors that we are using to build those models. And so in complexity settings, a model that is going to be able to account for all the interdependencies that may be context specific, or they may be not even realized at the time of developing the model, may really complicate things. And the need is there for moving into a form of reductionism, but a form of reductionism once we understand. I think that came out clear in some of the presentations. We understand some of the patterns that may be present, and that's really working towards mapping the relationships. So I would, in building the modeling, I think the mapping of these relationships is a necessary prerequisite to come in first. And then working on some of the variables that have the perhaps greatest impact on the context that is being looked at, and testing, of course, and looking at the type of predictions that we are, in an incremental fashion, that we are getting with real data collected or as we are moving in forward. So it is an ongoing process. It is a process that it is incremental in the sense that you're matching your model's predictability to real data. But I think prior to this, to the model development, you need to map out the pattern of relationships to understand how these variables are going to link together and be able to test the relationships.
Thanks, Peter. I take it one step further. The whole modeling process, the essence of that is to gain insight. Having the data points to it then is nice to quantify potential aspects of it. But modeling is really about gaining insight. It's about learning. It's not primarily a numerical exercise of coming up with a value attached to a p-value.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I would say that I agree and disagree, because what your model that you're putting up is, to use Rosen, is your best way of understanding the real world. So you develop a model, the best way of understanding the real world. Then you have to put that model to a test, though, because you may think you've got the model, and that's where the data, so in a way it's a hypothesis, and that's where the data, actually getting real world data, actually tests that out. And what the problem is that if you've got this model, you may not have the data to test it out. So you've got the problem of the data that we have access to in health services is not complete. So you have to have new data collections, and that itself is very expensive, and has to be it has to be surety that you're sort of on the right track. So I think that it's the way of the future. We're going to have more AI, more modeling with routinely collected data, and I think what's missing is this formulation of the model and the influence diagrams. But you still also need to test it. So I think it's a two-way thing, and it's an ongoing process. But I think it's absolutely crucial. That's why I was wondering what the people who are actually doing modeling had to say.
Yeah, from what I can see, no modeler who self-identified is still on.
Oh,
on the
okay,
floor.
all right, okay. So that's for another day.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll discuss. Yep.
Yeah, Kevin, short comment, and then Thomas and Paige had their hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on if we look back at the lessons from COVID, we found extreme strength and extreme weakness in the way we ran and presented models. And there were a wide range of models forecasting what would happen, and that shows the immaturity of the models. And that's not a shame on anyone, as Carmel was pointing out. We're in a stage where we've used all the available data to train our model, and now we don't have any new data yet to verify the model. I look back on when I was first starting in engineering. It was a great joke that our models proved that bumblebees could not fly. And we had great extent and that we could prove that bumblebees didn't fly. Well, of course, it was a joke. The bumblebees flew anyway. And we had the luxury of modeling something that the data was readily available. We could see bumblebees flying all the time. And the problem with some of these cutting edge models is that we we don't yet have the data that can even make them well, much less verify them. And that's where that respect and humility comes in that was not present, at least in the portrayal of the models. And that's what I would really encourage modelers to engage, that respect and humility, that it's, as Peter said also, we know but in part at this point, and we're getting better.
Thank you. Thomas, you wanted to make a comment?
Couple of minutes ago, I said goodbye, good night. I have to get up tomorrow very early in my pediatric practice, fighting against COVID and other diseases. RSV virus diseases. So sorry.
You're excused, Thomas. Sleep well.
So
it's getting late.
Great.
Thanks
Goodbye.
for coming along. Thanks for presenting.
Yes,
and
thank
we'll
you.
catch up soon.
Yes, we do. Okay, goodbye.
Okay,
Goodbye,
good night. Paige, over to you.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, this modeling question comes up a great deal in our course on complexity, and I think there's just this tension. I don't have an answer, and I'm definitely not a modeling expert, but there's the tension between being able to consider all the contextual variables that it might influence a model if you develop it a priori, versus developing a model based on the data and then coming back and testing it in a new context. So I think I go back to the amen to both and, because I think, you know, often when we model, and in most sciences, we create models to help us wrap our minds around what our complex situation, but in creating the model, we are not including other things, because the model is what helps us understand. So some things are going to be in and some things are going to be out. And going back to Carmel's point, only when we test it do we find out if we got the right things in there. So I think it's a question that's going to continue to evolve, and how do we create the processes and systems for continuous learning and improvement, so it's not necessarily a one and done, so that we are testing the models that develop as they come out, as we have more and more data and we're using AI and we're predictive modeling. How are we making sure that our real-time data and our context is reflective of what we're actually using? It becomes a complex question in and of itself, correct?
Okay, any other comments on this? I would like to go to communication as a next topic.
There was one thing I was going to put in, because I think there was a connection between what Kevin was presenting and also what Thomas presented. And that was, you know, especially with Kevin's points about ethos, is creating the space for knowledge to be shared. And there are actually Japanese scholars in knowledge management, Nanaka and Kono, who have proposed the space as BA, it's BA, and I'll pop in the chat a link to understand that. But I think it aligns with the idea that knowledge can only be shared among those who have come to some of these shared values and some of the understanding and the agreement to create this space. And I think that also goes along with Thomas's ideas of these convergence and semantics. But I think it's that understanding of sharedness. So for those of you who are interested in another perspective on that, I'll pop it in the chat.
Thank you, Paige. Unfortunately, Michelle had to leave, and I was really trying to allude to some of the issues she raised, which I think have a lot to do with communication, which then links back to Kevin's observations. So how do we communicate as of tomorrow for most of you, for the Australians for after lunch with our colleagues? What would be sort of the 30-second elevator speech to get them engaged in a conversation? Can I call on you, Dave? You made earlier comments that probably relate to this in one way or another.
I don't know, maybe in some kind of poetic way. I kind of liked a line from a Bob Dylan song that said, "I contain multitudes." And I thought, well, yes, but I can't hold more than one or two at a time. But and I think that, you know, tension between, you know, the complexity of things and what we actually can hold, and that's both kind of like a lived experience, but also an insight that there's so much more. And it's that kind of connection. It is, I think, what was being said in the presentation earlier about, you know, and both, you know, in terms of the discussion about reductionism and, you know, systems thinking. But I don't know what I would say tomorrow to inspire anybody.
Yeah, I think it takes courage to.
Yes, courage and fortitude, definitely.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Anyone else?
Ingrid, I'm happy to say something, I guess, from a practice point of view, and I'm just very grateful to have listened, absorbing, and still, I guess, integrating so much wisdom and ideas that have been shared. I guess in a practical way, what I try and do is work with clients in health. So it might be Justice Health, or in Western Sydney, the Community and Integrated Care team, and work with them in a, I guess, what might be a mixture of the appreciative inquiry, Joachim, that you've mentioned, complexity, liberating structures, to explore what is that more complex challenge. And I think in what you said, Paige, it's in all of the different, you know, quadrants, if you like, of Dave Snowden's model. What is the main issue or challenge? What's most needed to explore collectively? So then what is that shared frame? Who needs to come together? And often there will be more of an event. And I was listening and thinking, it's in the event, it's also the follow-up, but a gathering, let's say, of, we might get 20 to 50 people in a room with diverse perspectives. So if it was about integrated care from prisons into community, it might be people from the justice system, the justice health, the health system, a lived experience to whatever extent possible, and use that, I guess, appreciative inquiry to come with a shared frame of the collaborative inquiry to explore and harness what's already best, then to think about, well, what's possible to approach those tensions and complexities. I've found some of the liberating structures, models and works like 2510 crowdsourcing and other ideas that, you know, can hear diverse perspectives, ways of doing that. So just hearing today, I guess, keep thinking of how to do that. And maybe we can explore some of those practical approaches and processes more at some stage along the way. I'd love to hear anyone else's ideas or reflections there.
Okay, anyone?
I would just add to this about the, I think, issue with relationships. I would say that relationships shape communication, and I think some attention needs to be taken on the type of relationships we cultivate with others and stakeholders on the issue, whether it be global warming or any other, or COVID, or whatever the issue that we need to collaborate collectively and communicate collectively. I think the idea about empathetic leadership, thinking about the taking into consideration the framework, you know, I'm thinking about you and I'm thinking about your circumstances versus arrogant, self-confident thinking about me and how does the situation impact me. So paying attention to how we relate and in what framework we relate, whether it is self-centered or whether it is an empathetic framework, builds the relationship that I think either hinders or facilitates communication. And this is, I think, something that we haven't spoken about, but it's something that can be considered just from the experience of having to work with diversity of multi-stakeholders on various issues within healthcare. The relationship, I think, is the initial aspect of building the meaning of how we understand each other.
Come back to semiotics. Kevin, you tried to make a comment.
I didn't right this time. I'll save my chit for the next time.
Okay, Kate.
Yes, hi, it's Kate. Just to build on what was just being said about relationships, where in education we teach degree courses in personalized nutrition, so the whole complexity theory, machine learning, what have you, is very much part of what we do. But in terms of perhaps for tomorrow, whatever, I think one of the key things that's come over to me is about the relationships. And there was a model that was introduced to me in the 90s, actually, in leadership and management training. And that was the starting out with many people very action oriented, and they bypass the underpinning steps, which has the foundation and base of building a trusting relationship. And that was, something that came out in some of the presentations. And if you can build that foundation of a trusting relationship, it opens up possibilities and opportunities, which can hopefully ultimately come towards a shared action, that everyone feels that they can collaborate with. That's all I really wanted to share.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful. Then let's move on to the political side of things. The political economy was, to me, quite an important part of linking together how to understand what has happened during COVID. I think it brought to the forefront some of the deficiencies in thinking about politics as being for everyone benefit. Australia has done reasonably well. I think Ingrid pointed that out earlier in terms of social support and financial support at the beginning of the lockdown here, but our very neoliberal government has then in the second wave thrown its arms up and said it's all too expensive, and it has caused quite a lot of heartache for many people who suddenly were not supported anymore. Besides of a large amount of the community in the first instance, by definition, were excluded anyway. How do we deal with these kind of issues?
May I make a contribution
yes,
here? First of all, I feel like I've learned a lot today. I feel very much like a student. So thank you to all the contributors. And like my colleague Kate, I was very taken with that whole notion about the client-centered approaches, patient-centered approaches, and this notion of volumes and 3D and understanding. And I thought that was incredibly helpful. And my own background was in social work, and I could see so much practical applications on that. But the thing about the political economy was what struck me, certainly in the UK, is the way in which politics, I don't know, maybe politicians are very tuned in to the fact that humans are creatures of narrative. And they will give these shorthand sound bites, let's get Britain working, or let's get back to etc., and these kind of like rallying calls, which are kind of like shorthands. And I think most people want, to navigate their lives, it's that they're not thinking of complexity. And in terms of that whole stuff about getting policymakers to have greater literacy on this, but it's not often seen in the political debate and the political presentation of arguments that come down to sound bites. And I was very minded of a quote that the facts are what happened. The truth about the facts is our story. you know, so I think that kind of like that dissonance, if you want, is very, very powerful and is tapped in by politicians. And I just think maybe scientists need to get very good shorthand narrative push through messages. Like there's that the great one that where people say in politics and winning the votes, it's the economy stupid. And the retort to that I always say, it's people stupid. You know, it's the people that matter. It's you know, governments for the people, you know, by the people, doing things for the people. It isn't about, you know, the economy is our servant. We are not servants to it. But the reality in the systems that we have, that what you might shorthand call neoliberal systems, is that we are servants of the machine. And, you know, even when you think about the way even our data is atomized and used and monetized, you know, whether that be on social media or whatever. But so yes, the politics bit, my point is about how we can construct narratives of communication that does take account of the points that Kevin made about, you know, these are complementary. It's about bringing people together and seeing wisdom in all points of view.
Thank you, Dave, which reminds me of a book I'm reading currently about the meaning of values, written by an economist. Values or the economy has tried to measure what is valued and has changed their tune on it quite dramatically over the years. And at one stage, it was sort of in an indirect way said that you only can have a healthy economy if you have healthy people. And I think that is certainly a part that under neoliberalism and the atomist way of production has been utterly forgotten. Kevin.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bit contrarian here on the political realm, and I want to tread carefully as I say that, but I think it does not speak well of us as complexity and systems people when we fall into the same traps of the people that we're trying to encourage to grow beyond that. And I strongly suspect you and I have different ideologies on this, Joachim, and I still respect you and admire you and appreciate all the work you do. But I'm very wary of the simplification of labels like neoliberalism, because all the labels that we throw, all the categorizations that we throw are massive. It's egregious reductionism, that everyone who voted one particular way in a two-party system is homogenous and monolithic. It is ludicrous. And so the political problems, I would say, are the consummate example of the perils of reductionism gone berserk, where we believe that every one of hundreds of issues divides in US neatly into one political party or the other. And if we have problems in one political party, or we have problems in one economic system, or we have problems in one form of government, well, then clearly the only thing to do is to run to the other form and abandon it in its entirety. I think that is reductionism that is counterproductive to what we're trying to say. And the only other thing I want to say about politics is we have gotten what we asked for. We as a world in democratic, I'll put that in air quotes, in democratic companies, that's a Freudian slip if there ever were one, democratic countries, that without a populace that is systems and complexity literate, it becomes a popularity contest. And as was just said just a couple minutes ago, when we have popularity contests, they're decided by sound bites, and it is decided by which partisan can appeal most shamelessly to a constituency on the sound bites and the simplification and the rallying cries that stir the people to the polls. And that the whole political system shows what happens when we don't understand complexity and systemic and holism and all the interdependencies. And so I wholeheartedly agree that the political systems and the economic systems and the social structures and the educational systems and everything, every subsystem we can think of is terribly, terribly flawed. But when we try to say, and we can slap this label on it and go to label bar, label inverse, and we've got our problem solved, I think we're going from the frying pan into the fire.
Thanks, Kevin. I think what you highlighted in my mind while you were speaking is that a two-party system in the end boils down to what kind of focus do you create as the leader. While people are not homogeneous, as long as they still, in the end, function in line of the created focal point, that then, for what it's worth, is classified as in one way or another. Neoliberalism being in that sense then one of these more or less meaningful or meaningless categorizations. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in our somewhat abbreviated conference this year. The hope will be to catch up with all of you in person in one place on this planet next year, to have a conference that allows us to build personal relationships by conversations for the better of all of us. Thank you very much to the presenters that are still here. Thank you very much to all the other participants. For those who go to bed, sleep well. For those who still have to work, let's get on with it. See you all next year.
Looking forward to it. You're most welcome.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.